As a knight, I swore to protect the Empire and everyone within, but only when I joined you as a criminal was I able to understand who everyone was. The Clash of Sword and Nailgun. Chapter 1. The Testudo and the Sleeper. The midnight air of the Huberta Empire was usually cold, but tonight, the chill came more from the gravity of my mission than the climate. I sat alone in the near-empty passenger cart of the bullet monorail, watching the sleek, polished cityscape of the central district blur into a muted ribbon of light. Even this vehicle, designed for efficiency, reflected the dual nature of our realm. A Romanesque Gothic shell, powered by Magi science. The curved, vaulted ceiling of the cart was carved with intricate stone patterns, yet the floor hummed with the silent, irresistible force of a futuristic linear motor. My reflection stared back at me in the panoramic window. Karina, 25 years old, the very image of imperial authority. I wore the standard knight's armor, which, due to the integration of finely polished crystals, was anything but standard. These magically imbued decorations, deep sapphire and gold, made the plasteel lighter and harder than any common metal. But they also made the armor somewhat ostentatious. Tonight, every glowing shard of crystal felt like a beacon announcing my presence. I was going to the slums, and blending in would have been the priority. But the time frame of my mission was so small that going home and changing clothes would have literally cost me 10% of the allowed time. A low, regular breathing sound drew my attention away from the passing skyline. Across the aisle, closer to the window, a man was sleeping. He was slumped against the glass, his face obscured entirely by the wide brim of a cheap, worn fedora hat. His clothes were plain, mid to low-class work attire. Nothing remarkable, nothing that demanded the attention of an Imperial Knight. I dismissed him, focusing instead on the heavy steel case secured between my boots, containing the necessary identification and specialized tools for clandestine reconnaissance. We passed the last of the mid-tier districts. The architecture changed, morphing from elegant soaring spires to brutalist concrete towers stacked too closely together. A moment later, the monorail slowed, grinding slightly as it entered the lower sector's first stop. The doors hissed open. My internal systems immediately registered the change in atmosphere. The air felt heavier, thicker with the smells of cheap synth food and stale tobacco. A group of 4 young men, barely out of adolescence, dressed in clothes that were loud and deliberately aggressive, stepped inside. They were lower class, and their immediate reaction upon seeing me was a physical jolt of hostility. Their good humor soured instantly. They didn't hesitate. They came straight for me, their steps swaggering, looking for a confrontation. I didn't move, but I straightened my spine, maintaining the stoic posture that had become second nature. Their voices were low, laced with the rough, truncated local slang that the academics in the central district enjoyed labeling patois. I understood enough to grasp their intent, which was clearly antagonistic, but not enough to follow the rapid-fire abuse they were spewing. They fanned out, surrounding me in a tight semicircle. One of them, lean and jittery, leaned in close. I caught the unmistakable stench of cheap alcohol on his breath. He spat out a string of words. Most of it was meaningless noise, designed to intimidate and confuse, but then one word sliced through the verbal fog like a stiletto. Testudo, tortoise. The derogatory term the underclass used specifically for the knights, referring to our slow, heavily armored movements, our perceived thick-headedness, and our function as an impenetrable, often inert, shield for the Empire's elite. My pride, usually a calm, cold presence, flared like a torch. My right hand moved, the gauntlet settling on the ornate hilt of my imperial long sword. The hilt, also crystal-encrusted, reacted to my intent. A soft, cerulean glow began to emanate from the blade sheath, a sure sign that the enchantment, the lightness, and destructive kinetic enhancement was priming for combat. I was ready to fight. It would be an effortless, clinical engagement. 4 low-class hooligans versus a knight trained in 27 forms of specialized martial magic. They would be neutralized, perhaps detained, in seconds. Just as I prepared to draw the sword and end the foolishness, a different voice cut in. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't one of the youths. The sleeping man had stirred. He stood up slowly, pushing the fedora back just enough to reveal a pale, unremarkable face in his mid-30s, set in an expression of profound boredom. He spoke, his voice dry and matter-of-fact, but unlike me, he spoke their language fluently, the low, quick cadence slang that had just baffled me. Oi! Keemers! His tone was not threatening, merely informative. This one, he gestured lazily toward me with one hand, she could turn all your spleens into confetti before you finish blinking. And that is assuming she is having a bad day. And even if, by sheer chance, you made a dent in that polished nonsense she's wearing, the entire brass of the knights will roll down here like a thunderstorm and tear 3 square blocks of your mother's and grandmother's homes apart just to make an example. He yawned, stretching his arms above his head, the sound of his joints cracking faintly audible. I'd rather have a quiet ride to my stop. So, unless you want to spend the next week sleeping with one eye open, trying to avoid the heavy boot of imperial retribution, maybe play tough guys on the street corner where the stakes are cheaper. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Their hostile energy deflated, replaced by impotent fury. They exchanged frustrated, knowing looks. The threat of the knight's collective punishment was apparently far more terrifying than the immediate damage I could inflict. Without another word, they wheeled around and stomped toward the exit at the next stop, their departure even more sullen than their arrival. The monorail doors closed. Silence returned, broken only by the hum of the engine. I released the hilt of my sword. The cerulean glow instantly faded. I turned toward the man, my expression a carefully constructed mask of cold disapproval. I didn't need your help, I stated bluntly. It was a statement of fact, not a thank you. His interference was presumptuous. Only then did he bother to slowly turn and look directly at me, a wrinkle having just formed between his eyebrows. It was as if I had just stated that the sun was made of ice cream. His brown eyes were flat, devoid of emotion or offense. Who said it was you I was helping, metalhead? He replied, adjusting the fedora back down slightly. Before I could process the insult or question his motives, the monorail announced our destination. Lower Sector 7, the Entwine. My destination, his. He gathered his sparse belongings and stood waiting for the doors to open. As they hissed apart, he looked back at my armor one last time, his gaze lingering on the large, luminous crystals set into my shoulder pauldrons. Next time you come slumming, he advised, his tone shifting from bored observer to irritating lecturer, at least cover up all that jewelry. It's more wealth put together than many of them have seen in their lives. You might as well be spitting in the faces of these people with every single step you take. And then he was gone, stepping out onto the platform and melting into the shadows of the crumbling Romanesque arches that framed the exit. I followed, my jaw clenched, spitting in their faces. These weren't precious gems. They were functional, enchanted components necessary for my work. But his words, as irritating as they were, lodged in my mind. Every passing face on the dimly lit street, tired, suspicious, resentful, seemed to prove his point. My polished, glowing armor screamed, elite invader. Just a few yards from the station entrance, an elderly woman sat on a crate, her goods spread on a greasy blanket. old junk, broken mechanisms, discarded clothes. Among the pile, I saw it, a very old raggedy cloak, dark brown, thick, and stained. It looked like it had been discarded decades ago. Swallowing my pride, a bitter, unpleasant taste, I approached the vendor. The man's advice was tactical, not moral, and my mission required stealth. I completed the transaction quickly, trading a handful of small copper coins for the foul-smelling fabric. I immediately draped the cloak over my armor, pulling the hood low. It smelled of mildew and coal smoke, but it obscured the telltale sapphire glow and the slick lines of my imperial gear. I watched the man disappear around a street corner. He was a puzzle I didn't have time to solve, but for the first time, I was grateful for his intervention. It had saved me from a pointless detour involving paperwork and disciplinary action. My mission started now. I was to find the source of a powerful, illegal opioid that had finally spilled over from the poor districts into the lives of the noble elite, specifically costing the Count of Caspian his son's reputation. I had 48 hours to investigate and produce results. The knight hierarchy demanded discretion, but the real pressure came from the clock. I tightened the cloak around my shoulders and began to walk, eyes sharp, absorbing the oppressive details of the Entwine. I was supposed to be invisible, but every fiber of my being felt exposed. I was hunting, and this time, the rules of the game were not dictated by the Empire. Chapter 2. Lowbrow, high stakes. I pulled the coarse, musty hood lower over my forehead, letting the grime of the slums become my temporary uniform. The difference was immediate. The glowing, hostile glares I had felt leaving the monorail softened into mere apathy, a general resentment for anyone who didn't belong, but no longer specifically aimed at the symbols of imperial power. The heavy, raggedy cloak was a tactical necessity, a shield against the eyes of the disenfranchised, but every fiber of the cheap material chafed against the sleek metal of my armor, a constant, annoying reminder of the compromise I had been forced to make. The Entwine lived up to its name. It was an impossible weave of crumbling Gothic arches supporting modern, rusting scaffolding, ancient stone streets perpetually slick with runoff, and the aggressive synthetic glow of illicit commerce. The air thrummed with a low, chaotic energy. Too many people, too little space, too much desperation. My mission was deceptively simple. Find the core operation behind the new, ultra-potent synthetic opioid and dismantle it. The drug was a plague here, causing incidents of intoxication and fatal overdose weekly. For months, the High Command had ignored the crisis, labeling it an internal slum matter. But 2 days ago, the drug had infiltrated the central district, leading to the collapse of the Count of Caspian's son during his award acceptance speech. An opioid, mistakenly taken as a mild sedative. That single incident, the embarrassment of a noble family, had instantly shifted the priority from 0 to critical. I had 48 hours. The clock was already ticking. The discretion I was ordered to maintain meant no official channels, no reinforcements, and no fire support. It was a single-person raid on a complex criminal organization, and I had to produce results immediately, which was exactly why the hit-and-run approach was necessary. Move, observe, strike. There was no time for procedure. I walked the secondary arteries of the district, moving with the trained fluidity that the cloak only partially disguised. I wasn't looking for a sophisticated laboratory. I was looking for the supply chain's vulnerable neck. Opioids require distribution, and distribution requires dealers. After what felt like a useless hour of observing only the genuine misery of the district, my eyes locked onto a figure that fit the profile perfectly. He was positioned in a deep shadow near a service alley entrance, constantly shifting his weight, his eyes darting. He was staking. He was ready to flee. He was openly offering small, sealed packets to passing pedestrians, using the low, conspiratorial murmur of the trade. I found my own shadow in the recess of a disused mag-lift tower and settled in, waiting. My instincts, honed by years of training in infiltration and direct combat, told me to follow the supply line, not simply arrest a single street peddler. I needed his connection. The dealer spent another 20 minutes attempting transactions, selling a few packets, shooing away others. He checked his timepiece and then slipped into the narrow alleyway behind him. I moved silently, the heavy metal of my armor absorbing all sound thanks to the kinetic dampening enchantments. The alley led to a broader, older street, and at the end of that street, a single establishment stood out. It was a squat building, constructed of dark, unpolished stone and grimy plasteel siding, with a flickering neon sign above the entrance. The sign's script was in the common dialect, and it read, "Low brow." It was a pub, or perhaps a restaurant, a dark, uninviting void with a faint, throbbing rhythm spilling onto the street. The dealer pushed through the double doors and disappeared. I approached quickly, making sure the cloak covered my gauntlets, and slipped inside. The interior was dim, thick with smoke, and loud with the collective chatter of low-wage workers and hardened locals. The atmosphere hit me like a physical wave. Stale beer, fried oil, and a pervasive scent of despair. I spotted my target almost immediately. The dealer had seated himself at a rickety wooden table in the back corner. Across from him sat another man, older, thicker, and dressed slightly better. A supplier, likely. I managed to find a small, dark table near the bar, shrouded by a hanging antique lamp, and sat with my back to the wall, pretending to nurse a glass of water I didn't actually drink. My auditory enchantments, simple, focused magic applied to my helmet's internal receptors, were immediately activated. I strained to hear their conversation over the general din. "Selling out too fast," the dealer muttered, his voice tight with either nerves or excitement. "The demand is stupid high, even with the new batch coming in. We need to push the supply up again. Right now. We're losing profit waiting on you." The supplier leaned back, his voice a low, gravelly rumble.
Easy, easy.
"We can't rush the process. Not yet. We have to wait until the workshop can obtain more workers." The single word sent a cold spike through my gut. Workers. The drug was being manufactured, but that word suggested something far worse than hired labor. "And listen," the supplier continued, shifting uneasily. "We need to change our meet-up spot. Rumor is this place is now owned by the Handymen." My stoic facade nearly cracked. The Handymen. A phantom group of vigilantes, or perhaps a rival gang, rumored to be eliminating low-level criminals with construction tools magically enhanced for combat. My superiors dismissed them as a fairy tale used to scare street thugs, but the fact that a supplier was nervous about them was significant. "They're led by that weirdo, NAILGUN, eh?" the supplier hissed. "Crazy son of a bitch. Always leaves the body full of holes. He's supposed to be cleaning up the streets, but everyone knows he's just taking out the competition, right? Doesn't matter why. Just move the supply out of here quickly," the dealer urged. The conversation had reached its crucial point. I needed to know the workshop location. I leaned forward, focusing all my energy on the microphone in my helmet, willing the air to clear. And then the mood in the pub shifted completely. A low, familiar, almost sensual bass line began to flow from the small stage at the front. The rhythmic, complex sound of jazz piano music, the kind that was only ever played in the smoky, exclusive clubs of the Central District, completely overwhelmed my auditory filter. I risked a glance at the stage. Sitting at the battered acoustic upright piano The brim of his fedora tilted back just enough to reveal his profile, was the man from the monorail. He looked absolutely bored, as if playing a difficult jazz piece was the most tedious chore on his list. Yet, his hands were incredible. A blur of motion across the ivory, pulling a cascade of rich, melancholic notes from the tired instrument. My eyes met his. He scanned the room, and the moment he spotted my cloaked figure tucked in the corner, his eyebrows flickered up in surprise. Then, his face settled back into its default boredom, and he offered me a slow, deliberate wink. The subtle, irritating flirtation momentarily broke my concentration. He was good. Too good to be playing in a dive like this. The music was a wall of sound, and when I turned back to the corner, it was too late. The supplier and the dealer were gone. Their table was empty. They had used the distraction of the music to slip out the back without a trace. My jaw tightened in frustration. 48 hours. And I had just let the supply line vanish because of a bored piano player. The song ended with a dramatic, unresolved chord, and the pub burst into applause. Alex stood, gave a perfunctory, almost rude half-bow, and then, instead of returning to the bar, he walked straight through the crowd toward my table. He paused beside me, his height forcing me to tilt my head back. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, effortlessly. Before I could speak, he slid a glass of amber liquid, something that smelled expensive and smoky, across the table toward me. "It's a good disguise, Testudo," he said, his voice quiet but carrying easily over the renewed chatter of the pub. "It really captures the essence of just crawled out of a swamp." "I lost them," I stated, ignoring the drink and the barb. My voice was a low growl, laced with cold fury. He didn't apologize or look sympathetic. Instead, he took a slow sip from his own glass. "Yes, you did. You tend to lose things when you spend time listening to people complain about workers and NAILGUN, eh?" He paused, his brown eyes finally meeting mine, a spark of mischief finally breaking through the boredom. "Welcome to the low brow. I'm Alex. I own the joint. What can I get for the Empire tonight?" The air crackled between us. The sexual tension was sharp, undeniable, and deeply distracting. I was here on Imperial business, and he was treating it like a game. And worst of all, he knew exactly what I was looking for. Chapter 3. The price of a tune. The glass of smoky, amber liquid sat between us, untouched, a glittering insult on the filthy table. The sheer audacity of Alex, the pub owner, the pianist, the man who spoke the language of criminals and corrected Imperial Knights, was intoxicating in its own way. He knew everything, and he was using that knowledge as a lever. "You know what I'm looking for, Alex," I stated, my voice low and dangerous, forcing an edge into the name. I leaned slightly across the table, trying to project the full weight of my rank, even beneath the ragged cloak. "You saw the men I was following. You heard the key word, workers. This isn't common crime. This is a supply line that needs to be cut, and you are either part of the problem or the solution. Choose carefully." I watched his eyes, waiting for a flicker of fear, a tell, anything that would indicate respect for the authority I represented. Nothing. His eyes remained a bored brown, simply observing the light refract through his whiskey. "I know what you are looking for, Karina," he replied, using my name with a casual familiarity that scraped against my nerves. "And I already told you what I am. I'm the owner of this joint. I deal in drinks, smoke, and information. The second one, the drug, is bad for business. It kills the clientele. So, I am definitely on the side of the solution." He pushed the glass I hadn't touched an inch closer to me. "But unlike the Empire, which tends to just take what it wants, I charge for my solutions. And my fee for the address of that supply operation is going to be substantial." My mind raced. Knights were not issued large sums of cash for clandestine missions. We were equipped with specialized gear and high-clearance diplomatic chits. Useless here. The mission was predicated on extraction and capture, not purchase. How substantial? I demanded, already knowing the answer would be beyond my immediate resources. Alex took a slow, deliberate swallow of his drink, his eyes never leaving mine. Let's just say that the location of the next meeting, the identity of the supplier, and the direction of the workshop, all of that is worth enough to buy this entire pub outright. It's a lot more money than I expect a knight to carry when she's slumming. He smiled, a thin, humorless movement of his lips, especially one under orders for discretion. Your superiors wouldn't give you a bank ledger. He had read the entire situation perfectly. My time limit, my lack of resources, and my isolation. I paused, gathering my composure. I don't carry enough cash. Expected. He shrugged, pulling a damp cloth from his pocket to polish the rim of his glass. So, we trade. You have access to information that is equally useful to me. Information straight from the knights themselves can fetch a good coin, you see. Knowing where the next Imperial raid is going to happen, what areas the patrol routes skip, who among your rank and file is accepting bribes, things that keep this district from collapsing completely. Absolutely not. My voice was flat, the steel back in my spine. I will not betray the trust of the Empire, or my comrades. I have sworn an oath. He chuckled, a short, dry sound that conveyed immense skepticism. And yet, you're here, chasing a noble's drug dealer, while your comrades ignore the plight of 1,000 slum children. Loyalty is a complicated currency, Karina. He pushed back his chair, preparing to leave. I'm sure you'll find another way. Good luck. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through my carefully guarded professionalism. I could not fail this mission. Not with the clock burning away precious hours. To return to the Central District empty-handed after the humiliation of needing a slum pub owner's help to begin the investigation was unthinkable. I had to leverage everything I was. Wait, I said, the word barely above a whisper. He stopped, but he didn't turn back, waiting for me to continue. The admission that followed was the most difficult thing I had done all night. Harder than facing down the gang on the monorail. Harder than putting on the filthy cloak. It was the complete, voluntary removal of my own shield. I'm running out of time, I admitted, the bitterness heavy on my tongue. And I'm at a dead end. I need the information. Is there anything else I can give you for it? Alex turned slowly, and the bored mask finally cracked, replaced by a slow, mischievous grin that entirely transformed his face. The casual flirtation was gone, replaced by a challenge, a genuine spark of interest. As a matter of fact, there is, he said, his voice dropping to an conspiratorial rumble. I have a knack, shall we say, for spotting talent. You have a good voice, Karina. A clear pitch, even if you don't use it much. Probably better than anything else that's been on this stage in a decade. He pointed a finger toward the piano. I'll give you the address. Right now. If you perform one song with me, you sing lead. I'll play piano. If the crowd likes you, the information is yours, free of charge. I stared at him. It was an impossible, absurd demand. A knight of the Empire, performing a common lament in a slum pub for a handful of criminals and tired workers. It was an act of complete personal surrender, but it was also instantaneous. A quick exchange of humiliation for a critical lead. Fine, I ground out, pulling the hood back slightly to show him the full fury in my eyes. Get me the music. He laughed then, a real laugh, and nodded toward the stage. Already set, Tin Girl. A classic. something slow and smoky. I climbed the 3 steps onto the stage, the heavy, enchanted armor suddenly feeling like a crushing weight beneath the cloak. The crowd, which had been buzzing with conversation, fell into a strange, expectant silence. A pale, red-haired woman in armor, covered by a pauper's cloak, was about to sing. The incongruity was palpable. Alex launched into the opening chords of an ancient, well-known ballad, a tune about lost glory and fleeting beauty. The melody was familiar. I had heard it often in the barracks halls during moments of quiet reflection. My voice emerged, stiff, controlled, technically perfect, but lacking the necessary warmth, the soul the song demanded. The crowd murmured, unsure of this strange intrusion into their evening. Alex's fingers never faltered. He leaned in, his mouth close to my ear, his breath warm against my cheek. "Forget the sword," he whispered, his voice too close, too intimate. "Forget the rank. Forget where you are. Close your eyes, Karina. Imagine yourself somewhere you know you are safe, comfortable, a place you belong." I flinched at the unexpected contact, my concentration momentarily shattering. But his command resonated. I needed to be convincing. I couldn't fail this task too. I closed my eyes. I pushed away the image of the barracks, the polished steel, the rigid discipline. Instead, I let myself remember a moment long ago, before the armor, before the duty. I pictured a quiet, warm library, the smell of old paper and dust, and the simple, weightless joy of holding a book. A place where I was merely me, unburdened by the Empire's expectations. I opened my mouth, and the second verse came out differently. The technical perfection was still there, but now it was infused with a raw, unexpected vulnerability, a soaring, melancholic tone that vibrated with genuine emotion. My voice was clear, strong, and deeply evocative. The murmuring stopped. The entire pub fell silent, held captive by the sound. I finished the final line, holding the last note until it faded into the lingering echo of Alex's piano. Silence hung for a beat, 2 beats. Then the whole room erupted. Cheers, whistles, stamping of feet, loud and sincere. Alex stood up, offered a deeper bow this time, and turned to me, the pleased satisfaction back in his eyes. "They liked you," he murmured. "A lot. That makes me happy, Karina." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, folded scrap of paper. He pressed it into my hand, warm paper, still smelling faintly of synth tobacco. "The address," he said. "A storage facility in the industrial sector, near the old refinery. Good hunting, redhead." I didn't waste time on a thank you. I pushed through the crowd, clutching the paper, the adrenaline of the performance already giving way to the cold focus of the night. The clock had lost hours, but I had a target. The mission was back on track. Chapter 4. The Nail and the Sword. I did not stop to analyze the information. I simply acted. The address felt warm in my gauntleted hand beneath the rough wool of the cloak. A physical manifestation of the progress I had bought with my pride. I ignored the lingering, uncomfortable heat of Alex's presence and the unsettling realization of what I had exposed about myself. The mission now had a target, and that was all that mattered. The industrial sector was a short, brutal monorail ride away, a landscape of shattered concrete and rusting magi steel. The storage facility, identified by the faded numbers Alex had scribbled, was a warehouse of colossal, intimidating scale, looming in the pre-dawn gloom. Smoke vents hissed high above, venting not steam, but the foul, synthetic odors of chemical production. I discarded the wretched cloak in a filthy dumpster as soon as I was within sight of the target. I needed the full, unimpeded articulation of my armor now. The faint sapphire crystals on my pauldrons caught the scarce light, ready to project my presence as a singular, overwhelming threat. Discretion was a luxury I could no longer afford. The clock was ticking, and the objective was at hand. My augmented vision immediately picked up movement behind a row of stacked cargo containers. The dealer and the supplier from the pub, accompanied by 4 heavy-set men acting as guards. They were loading crates onto a lift platform, their movements frantic. There was no time for subtlety, no time for reconnaissance, no time to call for a team I was explicitly forbidden from summoning. This was the fast track, the immediate resolution the Empire craved. My blood surged, focusing into the cold, exhilarating clarity of the attack. I drew my Imperial longsword. The kinetic enchantment activated with a satisfying hum, casting a brilliant cerulean corona along the blade's edge, making the heavy plasteel feel like a feather-light extension of my will. I charged. I moved with the speed of the bullet monorail, crossing the open ground in a blur of red and sapphire. The guards barely had time to turn before I was upon them. The first guard raised a kinetic rifle. I brought my sword down in a sweeping arc. The blade, enhanced by arcane physics, cut through the weapon and the man's armored arm with the clean, effortless separation of a hot knife through butter. He screamed, dropping to the ground. The next 2 lunged at me with crude, enchanted truncheons. I deflected the first, the impact sending a jarring shockwave through my gauntlet, before using the momentum to thrust the tip of my sword directly through the joint where the second guard's neck met his pauldron. The kinetic force sent him flying backward into a wall of crates, where he crumpled, neutralized. The supplier and the dealer were screaming, scrambling for a back exit. The dealer pulled out a small chemical sprayer. I kicked out, the force of my armored boot snapping his knee and sending him sprawling. The fight was clinical, fast, and exactly what I was trained for. The operation was on the verge of collapse, but just as I turned toward the supplier, 2 figures emerged from the shadows of the warehouse entrance. They were knights, clad in the same ostentatious armor as mine, but theirs was subtly darker, the crystalline polish less maintained, their posture less disciplined. They were experienced, their expressions set in identical masks of arrogant malice. "Well, well," the taller of the 2 drawled, drawing a massive 2-handed greatsword, his voice amplified by his helmet's vocal filter. "Look what we have here, a little stray dog trying to eat the profits." My heart seized. Corrupt knights. The situation had changed gravely. This went from a criminal operation to a state-sanctioned shadow economy. The smaller knight moved with devastating speed, using a specialized energy whip. He struck before I could fully adjust, the energized lash wrapping around my sword arm. A pulse of concentrated anti-magic energy flared, instantly killing the kinetic enchantment on my blade. The sword became dead weight, nearly tearing the weapon from my grip. I abandoned the blade, letting it drop to the concrete with a deafening clang. I shifted to unarmed combat. But these men were better than the thugs I usually faced. They were my peers, trained to counter my own fighting style. The taller knight brought his greatsword down in a blinding arc. I managed to block it with my forearm pauldron, but the impact sent me staggering backward, my visor sensors screaming red alert warnings from the strain. The smaller knight followed up, hitting me with a powerful kinetic kick to the abdomen. I gasped, the air knocked from my lungs and slammed against a metal support beam. The enemy knights advanced, their faces visible through their visors, cold, satisfied. I was trapped, disarmed, and facing certain death or capture. I had walked straight into a superior force. "Tough luck, little sister," the taller one mocked, raising his blade for the killing blow. Then, a sound split the air, not the crack of a kinetic rifle, but the sharp, percussive thwack of a heavy-duty pneumatic weapon. A projectile, a construction nail, thick as my thumb, screamed through the air and embedded itself deep into the great sword knight's knee joint. The specialized nail, clearly, magically enhanced, tore through his plasteel leg armor like paper. He bellowed in agony and crumpled, his strike going wide. The smaller knight whirled around, confused. Thwack, thwack, thwack. 3 more nails followed, striking the small knight's shield pauldron in rapid succession, forcing him to cover his face and retreat, sparks flying off his corrupted armor. A figure stepped into the light, emerging from the smoky depths of the warehouse, a low-slung, compact profile made imposing by the industrial tool he held in both hands. It was a massive, drum-fed nail gun, glowing with a faint, angry red energy. Standing there, the fedora hat low over his eyes, was Alex. He looked at me, gave that same irritating, bored look, and then back at the 2 downed knights. "Took you long enough, lady," he commented dryly. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Alex was Nailgun A. He had orchestrated the entire setup, using me as bait and a distraction, but he had also saved my life. The odds just evened up. Alex called out to the remaining knight, adjusting the grip on his weapon. 2 of us against 2 of you, let's dance. The fight restarted instantly, but this time, the dynamic was completely different. Alex did not rely on standard combat forms. He used the nail gun as a ranged suppressant, firing bursts of heavy nails whenever the enemy knights tried to close the distance. The corrupt knights had to use their shields and magical blocks constantly, unable to advance. This gave me the opportunity I needed. I launched myself from the wall, retrieving my sword in one fluid motion. My kinetic enchantment reignited instantly, hungry for action. The first knight, the one with the 2-handed greatsword, now limping heavily, was slow. I used a low, sweeping magic kick to his good leg, bringing him down to the ground. As he fell, Alex, with startling athleticism, darted past me, not shooting, but using the heavy nail gun itself as a brutal melee weapon. He clubbed the knight across the helmet with the solid steel housing, knocking him instantly unconscious. The final knight, whip at the ready, was more cautious, attempting to hold us at bay. "Karina!" Alex yelled, not looking at me. "Frontal pressure! Push him into the crates!" I didn't question the order. I launched a barrage of precise sword strikes, forcing the knight backward. As he stumbled against the wall of stacked crates, Alex dropped the nail gun, lunged forward, and executed a perfect, professional grappling takedown, hooking the knight's ankle and sending him smashing face first into the concrete. The warehouse fell silent again. The 2 corrupt knights were defeated. From the high-up rafters and from behind shipping containers, more figures emerged, all dressed in practical, dark work clothes, many carrying simple tools like wrenches, hammers, and saws, each tool humming with a subtle, protective, magical glow. The handymen. A collective of vigilantes, not a gang. I had it covered, I spat, turning my sword toward Alex, suspicion overriding gratitude. "Was this always your plan? Use the Imperial Knight to draw out your competition?" Alex barely looked up as he checked the magazine on his nail gun. "If you had succeeded, we wouldn't have had to show up. We would have stayed hidden. But you ran into a couple of your crooked colleagues, and suddenly you were 1 second from being disassembled. We prefer anonymity." He gestured to the criminals I had downed, the dealer and the supplier, both whimpering on the ground. "This filth is ours to deal with. Those 2 knights," he jabbed the gun toward the unconscious armored figures, "they're your problem. Now, let's find the workshop." I was about to refuse, when one of the defeated knights, the supplier's contact, suddenly let out a smug, pained laugh. "You'll never get anything out of us, rookie," he ground out, wincing from the nail in his knee. "And when you bring us in, your entire command will discredit you. You think any of the other knights will ever trust you again, after you deliver your own?" Alex looked down at the smug knight, the spark of mischief in his eyes replaced by cold, dangerous focus. "That's true. She won't." He lowered the nail gun, aiming it at the uninjured knee of the supplier's contact. "But I'm not bringing you in. I just need an address. And since we already searched the entire Entwine, it can't be in the slums. Where is the workshop?" The knight sneered. "Go to hell, slum rat." Alex paused, looking disappointed. He lifted the gun and fired, first into the man's calf, then his thigh, then his shoulder. 3 nails struck with brutal precision, sinking through the plasteel and deep into muscle and bone. The knight's screams were agonizing, filling the silence of the warehouse. I tried to move, to stop the excessive, brutal force. But the handymen surrounding us were already riled up, their faces hard and unforgiving. "Stop! That's enough!" I yelled, reaching out. One of the handymen pushed me back, gently but firmly. "They would do the same to us, Knight. They do worse every day." Alex didn't wait for the knight to yield. He simply stared at the second knight, who was now awake and watching the torture with stark terror in his eyes. Alex fired a quick burst of 5 more nails into the first knight's remaining good leg and arm, his screams turning into strangled, desperate sounds. Alex turned to the second untortured knight. His voice was completely calm, cutting through the agony. "Where are the children?" The words slammed into me. A shocking, visceral understanding of the supplier's earlier comment about workers, not hired help, slave labor. The terror on the second knight's face solidified into sheer, terrified resignation. He immediately cracked. "The Duke," he whispered, his eyes wide and fixed on the first knight's twitching body. "The Duke of Sparta. It's on his property. It's a private workshop, heavily shielded. The kids are from the slums. He needed cheap, easily replaceable labor for the synthesis process." Chapter 5. The Glass Ceiling of Justice. The screams of the first corrupt knight finally died away, leaving an awful silence punctuated only by his ragged, gasping whimpers. The air in the warehouse was thick with metallic dust and the scent of fresh blood. The revelation that the workers were kidnapped slum children forced into slave labor by a duke slammed into me with more force than any kinetic strike. It was a moral wound that eclipsed the political betrayal. I whirled on Alex, my sword still humming, but now aimed at him. His composure was unnerving, a stark contrast to the terror he had just inflicted. "He told you what you wanted," I ground out, my voice tight. "The children, the Duke. Now, these men are coming with me. To the High Command, to face a court-martial." Alex let out a low, humorless laugh, tilting the nail gun so its muzzle pointed at the ceiling. The red light of its enchantment flickered off. "You're still talking about your justice system, Clanks," he scoffed, gesturing to the whimpering slum criminals who were now being efficiently bound with high-tensile wire by the silent, pragmatic handymen. "Those 3, the dealers and the supplier, they'll be judged here, by the community they poisoned. And those 2 knights," he nodded toward my captured colleagues. "You take them back. That's your burden to carry, not ours. But you bring them in, and I promise you, the knights will ensure they walk free, and you will be the one who pays the price." His argument, though delivered by a torturer, resonated with the cynical pragmatism of the slums. He saw the rot, and unlike me, He wasn't constrained by the promise of integrity that Imperial armor was supposed to represent. "I won't allow you to execute them," I stated, stepping closer, my blade dangerously near his throat. Alex didn't flinch. He simply met my gaze, the boredom in his eyes replaced by a challenge I couldn't ignore. "We aren't murderers, Karina. If their crimes can be offset by their future labor, perhaps they live to fix the damage they've caused. But that is our law, the law that protects the invisible." The standoff was tense, an alliance forged in combat already fracturing over ideology. He was right. If I fought him, I would lose the information and the evidence, and I had no time to waste. I had to prioritize the children. "Fine," I conceded, forcing the word past my teeth. "The slum criminals are yours. But the two knights, they are property of the Empire. They come with me. You will not touch them further." Alex gave a short, curt nod. "Agreed. Now move. We need to disappear before a patrol sweep picks up the magic flares from that little skirmish." The handymen worked quickly, efficiently loading the bound dealers and the now unconscious, nail-riddled knight into heavy, unmarked delivery vehicles. I secured the two corrupt knights myself, using specialized restraints that locked their armor's mechanisms and applied a mild sedative to keep them quiet. I did not look at the first knight's wounds. I simply performed the duty. I was taking them in as evidence of the Duke's reach and as evidence of my own success. As the sun began to paint the sky with the violent oranges and reds of dawn, I was back on the monorail, riding in the cargo carriage, hauling two disgraced colleagues. I arrived at the central barracks just as the morning duty rotation was commencing. The reception was everything the handymen had predicted, and yet I was entirely unprepared for the sheer velocity of the turn. My immediate superiors, the two commanders of the Urban Enforcement Division, men I had respected and served for years, were ecstatic. They led me into a pristine conference room, the sapphire crystals of their own dress armor sparkling in the morning light. "Karina, this is phenomenal," Commander Ferdinand boomed, slapping my pauldron. 48 hours, and you've cracked the entire slum side of the operation, and exposed two corrupted elements within the rank and file. The Count is already satisfied. We're discussing a possible promotion, effective immediately. You've neutralized a significant internal threat, Knight, Commander Glaucus added, his tone more subdued, but equally pleased. We can make an example of these two. It shores up the integrity of the whole corps. Excellent work. I stood ramrod straight, my own armor dull with warehouse grime, but my voice was clear, delivering the final, crucial intelligence. Sir, the two men were working under the authority of the main architect of the operation. The workshop is not in the slums. It is located on the estate of the Duke of Sparda. The congratulatory smiles vanished instantly. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ferdinand and Glaucus exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated terror. "The Duke of Sparda," Ferdinand whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "Yes, sir. And the workers they mentioned are kidnapped children from the Entwine, forced to synthesize the opioid. We have the confession from one of the captured knights. I need full investigation orders and the immediate deployment of a siege unit. We have to move now, before he realizes we've located him." Commander Glaucus, who moments ago was praising my efficiency, now held up a shaking hand. "No, absolutely not, Karina. Stand down." "Sir?" "But the children, the Duke of Sparda," Glaucus interrupted, his voice returning to a cold, official murmur, "is practically untouchable. He has 3 seats on the Imperial Trade Council, personal protection contracts with the Imperial Guard, and a lineage that predates the invention of the monorail. Any attempt to investigate him would be seen as an aggressive act against the very fabric of the Empire. Ferdinand leaned over the massive conference table, his eyes darting to the door as if the Duke himself might be listening. "Listen to me, Knight. You have done your duty. You contained the fallout. You gave the Count his justice. You provided us with a clean-up opportunity. That is all the mission required. Pursuing the Duke of Spada will not result in his downfall. It will only result in our immediate firing and your complete, permanent discrediting." In that moment, standing in the polished, magnificent fortress of the Knights, I finally understood the truth. My superiors were nothing but bureaucrats in shining armor, terrified of the power of nobility. The Empire was a magnificent fraud, a glass house of justice where the panes only shattered when the rich threw stones at each other. The core of the problem, the slave labor and the Duke, was deemed secondary to political survival. My fury was cold, replacing the heat of my earlier panic. The clock was still running, but the path to justice was now closed by my own organization. I had 48 hours to complete the mission, and the Empire had just become my new adversary. I left the barracks, leaving behind the 2 corrupt knights and the empty promise of a promotion. I needed to move fast and ruthlessly, and the only person who had provided true, actionable progress was the man who had just tortured one of my colleagues. Chapter 6. A drink in the Entwine. That night, the Central District felt like a trap. The polished marble, the sterile air, the unwavering gaze of the surveillance nodes, it all pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. The Imperial armor remained locked away in my quarters, a cold monument to my oath. I couldn't bear to wear it, nor could I risk being recognized. After a few hours of uneasy sleep, I went shopping, not for supplies, but for anonymity. My uniform was a brand, a commitment. My civilian clothes were 3 years out of fashion, cheap and loud. I bought a simple, dark tunic and fitted trousers from a tiny stall near the lower marketplace. They were unremarkable to the casual eye, yet they complemented the lean, hard lines of my physique in a way that felt entirely new and unsettling. It was the first time I had worn clothes that didn't demand reverence. Under the cover of dusk, I took a ground transit line into the Entwine. I navigated the familiar maze of neon and rust until I reached the back alley and the chipped neon sign of the low brow. The pub was warm, loud, and smelled pleasantly of stale beer and wood smoke. It was the antithesis of everything the night stood for, and I felt immediately exposed. I found an empty booth near the back, my heart hammering against my ribs. It took Alex less than a minute to spot me. He was wiping down the mahogany counter, his dark hair pulled back and a towel slung over his shoulder. He froze, his usual easy rhythm disrupted. His expression was a perfect blend of surprise and calculated neutrality. He finished wiping the counter and slid into the booth across from me, setting down a pair of chipped earthenware mugs. "Well, well," Alex said, his voice low over the murmur of the crowd. "Look who decided to join the proletariat. I figured you'd spend your evening polishing the breastplate and writing stern reports." "No plates, no reports, just sorrows to drown," I replied, running my thumb over the rim of the mug. I noticed he hadn't asked if I wanted something. He'd just assumed. He filled both mugs with a dark, bitter ale. I took a large sip, the flavor cutting through the tension. It took the edge off the metallic taste of betrayal that had clung to my tongue all day. It went down exactly how you predicted. I stared into the void, letting that cold wave of disillusionment drown everything else out. As soon as the word Spada was spoken, everything else became irrelevant. The drugs, the crimes, the children, they ignored it all. Alex took a long drink, unfazed. "Your job is to enforce order, Karina. Order is what keeps the Duke rich. You're paid to look the other way, or in this case, to look straight ahead while the real crime happens behind you. He met my gaze. I'm not surprised. What does surprise me is seeing you here without your ceremonial shell. I needed to talk to someone who didn't swear an oath to the system, I admitted quietly. He gave a dry, humorless chuckle. Fair enough. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a serious conspiratorial whisper. We were able to confirm the information your colleague gave us. My breath hitched. You found the kids? Alex shook his head sharply. We don't have visual confirmation, but we know in which property they're being hidden. The House of Embers, the Duke of Sparda's personal fortress, high up on the West Ridge. The audacity of it is what makes it safe. Who would ever file an official report demanding to raid the Duke's private home? The house is impenetrable, I whispered, thinking aloud of the layered defenses, the arcane shielding, the exclusive access protocols. It's beyond the jurisdiction of all but the highest imperial warrants. Worse than that, Alex continued, setting his mug down. We've confirmed the patrols. The outer perimeter is guarded by 2 dedicated companies of the Duke's private security, but the internal security, the really tight rings, are run by corrupt knights. He gestured around the pub, a tired, frustrated sweep of his hand. We've got the intelligence. We know the routines. We even have a schematic of the internal dock and the workshop location. But we are handymen. We build things. We can't dismantle a fortress protected by the best armed soldiers in the Empire. We can't find a way in. He trailed off, waiting. He had laid out the problem, an impossible wall of power, money, and corrupt authority. I stared down at my plain clothes, then at the strong, competent hands of the man across from me. He and the handymen were the righteous. I was the corrupted tool. My mind raced through the protocols, the security checkpoints, the biometric locks, and the arcane shield signatures of the house. Every single defense was designed to stop outsiders. But I was not an outsider, was I? They can't get in, I murmured, the words catching in my throat. I stood up, the action deliberate and sudden. I looked straight through the wall, through the city, to the towering fortress on the ridge. I can, I stated, the plan forming fully in my mind, cold, terrifying, and brilliantly simple. I'm the only one who can. Chapter 7. The Trojan Testudo. The House of Embers on the West Ridge was an architectural lie, a delicate crystalline structure concealing a brutal armored core. At 0200 hours, I stood outside the reinforced gates in my armor. The sapphire plating felt cold, a weight of immense responsibility, or immense hypocrisy, depending on the moment. Beside me, Alex wore a stolen, high-end contractor uniform that barely concealed the customized tools strapped to his waist. He held a high-frequency communications scrambler, jamming the primary channels. We were operating on a sliver of time, relying entirely on the assumption of greed. Remember the story, Knight, Alex muttered, his face set. You're bringing in the unscheduled replacement squad for the E-Wing shift. High priority, high discretion. You're too good to be doing this, and you know it. I am an elite knight, I replied, forcing imperial arrogance into my voice. I am above question. We drove a low-profile transport to the first checkpoint. The guard was one of the corrupt Imperial Knights, his face partially obscured by a blacked-out visor, but his insignia was correct. He didn't bother with proper protocol. He merely glanced at the Imperial armor looming next to the driver. Shift change? The corrupt knight grunted, bored. Unscheduled. Sparda's orders, I stated, my voice projected by the armor's filter, impersonal and authoritative. Open the shield. We don't have all day. The knight hesitated for a beat, then shrugged, the bribe overriding his duty. He disabled the complex arcane shield. The security perimeter parted, granting us passage into the internal docks. The armor had opened the door. We bypassed the main internal checks and drove toward the vast, empty vehicle maintenance dock near the house's foundation. This section was rarely used, making it the perfect blind spot. Alex killed the engine. The schematics show a major, decommissioned hydrostatic sewer line running right beneath this deck. That's our access point. I located the inspection hatch, a heavy steel circle sealed with a kinetic lock and a pressure gauge set to the Imperial Knight's unique harmonic frequency. I pressed my gauntlet to the mechanism, feeding the required energy signature. It was an access method only a legitimate knight could use, proving Alex's intel was flawless. The lock released with a soft hiss. We pulled the hatch open, revealing a dark, tight shaft leading down to the sluggish, deep water of the old sewer line. Alex dropped a high-powered, low-frequency signal emitter down the shaft. A minute later, a sequence of rhythmic, metallic taps echoed up from below. The handymen were in place. Go. We draw the internal security to the upper levels, Alex ordered. The main objective is the basement dungeon and the extraction gate. We moved quickly through the service corridors, using my armor's schematics to navigate the internal structure. The corrupt guards, thinking this was a simple inspection round, were taken completely by surprise. I moved with lethal efficiency, using concussive bursts and non-lethal strikes to disable and bind every guard we encountered. Alex was ahead of me, his nail gun repurposed as a breaching tool, forcing open the heavy sealed door to the sub-level dungeon. The air in the dungeon was stagnant, freezing, and thick with the misery of the 37 enslaved children. They were shackled to the stone walls, hollow-eyed and frail. Alex and the handymen, who had poured out of the sewer line, moved with clinical speed. They ignored the few armed guards remaining, focusing entirely on the children. In the center of the room, 2 handymen were deploying a heavy, bronze-plated device, the extraction gate. It was a massive, single-use teleportation beacon designed to stabilize and jump a large mass to a preset coordinates, the heart of the Entwine's fortified sanctuary. As the device whirred to life, bathing the dungeon in a blinding emerald light, the Duke's personal alarm system finally shrieked to life. Sirens wailed across the house. "We're out of time!" I yelled, using a kinetic sweep to neutralize the last guard. Alex checked the extraction gate's panel. "It's green. The handymen are taking them through now. Go! The Duke's chambers, level 10. We raced back up, leaving the last of the children vanishing into the emerald light. The knight's armor had to be the final deterrent. We found the Duke in his lavish penthouse study, surrounded by priceless antiques and walls of arcane projection screens. He wasn't wearing armor, but his robust frame and the cruel smile on his face suggested he didn't need it. He raised a ceremonial rapier, the thin blade crackling with pure, contained lightning, a rare and illegal enchantment. "A rogue knight and a slum rat," the Duke sneered, his voice booming. "You think a suit of steel makes you immune to divine fire." He moved with astonishing speed, like a master duelist. I deflected the first 2 lightning strikes with my pauldron, the shield absorbing the energy, but the third forced me back. The Imperial armor was designed for tanks and mass engagements, not for a lightning-fast magical duel. "Alex! His movements are too fast!" I yelled. Alex, meanwhile, was a whirlwind of controlled demolition, using charges and heavy tools to shatter the arcane relays powering the Duke's personal shields and the room's structural integrity. Seeing his defenses failing, the Duke focused his entire attention on Alex, unleashing a concentrated blast of lightning. I intercepted the blast, stepping between them. The full force hit my breastplate. The armor shrieked and flared white, but the layered kinetic and thermal shielding held, successfully dispersing the energy. I was staggered, but operational. Seizing the momentary distraction, Alex, utilizing a specialized grappling winch, launched himself toward the Duke, wrapping a heavy, insulated wire around the rapier's hilt. The lightning shorted, shocking the Duke into momentary paralysis. I didn't hesitate. I drove a non-lethal kinetic gauntlet punch straight into his solar plexus, followed by a precise, stunning blow to his temple. The Duke of Spada collapsed onto the mosaic floor. "We need to go! Now! Imperial reinforcements are 10 minutes out!" Alex shouted, breathing hard. "We leave no evidence!" I commanded, looking around the opulent room that concealed so much cruelty. I unclipped a handful of specialized thermal demolition charges, normally used for field repairs. They would melt the house's internal supports. I placed them strategically around the Duke's central power core, setting them to detonate in 60 seconds. I grabbed the Duke's unconscious body, tossing him over my shoulder. "The Duke gets justice," I told Alex, meeting his gaze through the darkness and smoke. "Slum justice," Alex corrected, securing the last of his tools. "The only kind that matters tonight," I agreed. And together, the armored knight carrying the highest nobility of the Empire, and the handyman, carrying nothing but a tool, plunged back into the abandoned service corridors. Behind us, the House of Embers was beginning to groan and buckle, its internal supports dissolving into vapor. The evidence was being erased by a night. Epilogue. The reckoning. The immediate danger had passed, leaving behind a profound silence, punctuated only by the distant, muffled sound of Imperial sirens responding to the House of Embers' collapse. We had retreated to a small storage room in the back of the low brow. The rescued children were already gone, processed by the silent, efficient network of care providers. The Duke was secured in a sub-level room, awaiting the judgment of the people he had enslaved. I stood beside Alex, my heavy, scorched Imperial armor still caked with dust and residue, the sapphire crystals dull but intact. I had not removed it since the collapse of the house. "It's done," Alex said, his voice flat with exhaustion. He looked up at the grate above us, where the first faint grey light of dawn was filtering in. "The handymen have the evidence, the prisoner, and the victory. You can go back now. They'll need a scapegoat for the Duke's downfall, but the knight's reputation has too much political weight to be easily discarded. They'll wrap this up in paperwork and a cover-up." "They already have," I confirmed, thinking of the High Command's predictable terror. "They will call the Duke's demise an unfortunate industrial accident and claim the children were never there. They'll demand I hand over the truth, but as long as I play dumb for long enough, they won't dare touch the armor itself." We walked into the empty tavern, the atmosphere surprisingly calming compared to the chaos we had just lived through. I looked down at my gauntlet. It was stained and scratched. No longer the pristine symbol of imperial justice, but a tool I had successfully weaponized against the very system that created it. I had learned more about the Empire's rot in 48 hours than in 5 years of service. He walked over to the back of the bar, retrieving his jacket. "The sun's up. You need to be gone before they send the first official retrieval team. Make sure you have an alibi for when they come looking for you." He paused, then offered a small, thin smile that finally reached his eyes. "If you decide the glamorous life of a knight isn't for you, there's always a spot here. I need a singer who can hold a room captive." He walked back toward me, the morning light catching the stubble on his cheek. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial murmur. "The pay is dirt cheap, but the mood is nice, and the drinks are free for employees." I returned the smile, a genuine, warm expression that felt startlingly new on my face. "If I show up here again, Alex," I answered, my voice soft but certain. It'll be for a social call. I stepped close to him. He didn't flinch, holding my gaze. I rose up on my toes and pressed a quick, fierce kiss to his scorched cheek, a final acknowledgement of the unlikely, dangerous bond we had forged in fire and treason. Then, I turned and walked away from the light of the Entwine and back toward the central district. The armor felt heavy, the burden of hypocrisy immense, but I was still a knight. And now, I had a real enemy. An enemy that believed I was still loyal. My new life had just begun. The end.
If you enjoyed this quick escape, hit the subscribe button for new stories twice a week. Until then, I'll see you at the next flip of the pages.